My name's Alan Williams. I'm the Manager of Logistical Support and Risk Management at the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute. But before I really get started, I want to do what I've been doing each of the other sessions and start off by thanking Howard County. I really do, for putting on a safety symposium and more particularly to the participants for taking part. Before being with the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, I was with the Anne Arundel County Fire Department. And I was lucky enough to be assigned as a division chief to their Health and Safety Division in 1998. It was a brand new division, hadn't occurred before. And back then, safety was a bit of a hard sell. Maybe it somewhat is today, but it's a better sell. And it's very refreshing to me to see today having a safety symposium. I mean, who would have thought we would have a safety symposium back some years ago? More particularly, have 100 participants. I understand were registered. So that's truly awesome and very refreshing for me. When I was contacted to do this, I thought, how best to approach training for you and speak in 45 or 50 minutes. So what I've done is divided into 3 parts. And the first part is fire training, fatalities, and injuries, where we're going to take kind of a big picture look at all fatalities, firefighter fatalities, but then narrow that focus into just training-related fatalities, and then look at injuries. Then following that, I want to share some best practices or some general strategies that we use at the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute to help reduce the risk of injuries and death. And as we go through that, I'm going to want you to think within your jurisdiction some strategies you use for risk management, because at the end we're going to have some time to discuss those. The next thing that we'll be doing is sharing with you a near miss that we had at the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute. And it's something that happened, maybe not something we're particularly proud of, but it happened, and we want to share with everyone what happened in the hopes that you can too learn with it as we did, but more particularly learn the value of sharing near misses, because I think there's still maybe some hesitancy among all of us to do that, and I think it's an important process. And then last, as I mentioned, some time to share some of your risk management strategies, because again, you'll see hopefully some lights going off in your mind as I share some of the statistics in this first segment to help highlight some of those. So that's kind of where we're going in the next 45 or 50 minutes. So we'll start off with fire training, fatalities, and injuries. 2 headlines. One on the left, one that we really don't want to see, although obviously we have seen it in the past. Here's fire instructors taunted recruits in Memphis Hell Night. Fire recruit James Coleman remains in critical condition from October drill. So obviously these are the kind of things that do happen, makes the headlines, and not part of the future that we want to see in fire training. But by the same token, there are some good solutions out there. CDC has workplace solutions preventing deaths and injuries to firefighters during live fire training in acquired structures. And there are a lot of other good practices out there too, NFPA and many other best practices. Physical demands of firefighting. I'm sure you all know what those are. Cardiac stress, thermal stress, inhalation of contaminants, disorientation and panic, and physical injury. But I wanted to kind of focus on that 4th one down there for a second, disorientation and panic. And as some of you may or may not know, the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute partners with the Center for Firefighter Research and Development. It's kind of a partnership between MIFRE and the University of Maryland. And it's a neat partnership because through some grant funding, often some very interesting, worthwhile research can be done. Some recent research has been done on firefighter location devices. Others have been on some smart garments which actually expand when they get heated. The threads expand, so you have more layering in the event of high heat. But more particularly, physical demands of firefighter back, I suppose it was probably 10 years ago, it was before I retired and was still with Anne Arundel, that they did some studies through this group that really tried to get their arms around what the demands of firefighting was. And they used these life shirts that you may have heard. And you put them on, and they can measure such things as respiration rate, pulse, those sorts of things, to really get a sense for what the demands are. And folks put these on, went through the burn building, first floor, second floor, served as the nozzle person, the backup, hose puller, went through the maze. And these were folks that were seasoned people. These weren't individuals this was their first firefighter class. They were seasoned folks. But what the data told us was that there's a lot of demands put on the body during this. I mean, and more particularly, not necessarily during the activity in the burn building, but it was the maze that really stressed folks. It really jacked up their heart rates, respiration rates. And again, these are people that I'm sure had been through that maze before. Surely they had been through the burn building before. If not that, others very similar to it. But despite that, they still, the effective and physical demands of firefighting was there. And I guess my point is this, is that no matter whether you're a recruit or someone who's been in the department for 30 years, and no matter whether it's an environment that's familiar to you or not, the demand is there. That physical demand is there. And it's something that we can't just cast aside to say, well, that happens to other folks. It happens to us too, because data clearly shows that. So this slide here is kind of our first broad brushed look at firefighter fatalities in general. And you can see it goes from 2003 to 2013, a 10-year study. Remember, this is all fatalities, including training and otherwise. So we see in 2003 and 2008, I guess, it was hovering around that 100 mark. I mean, that's what we always used to say, right? 100 firefighters die each year. That was probably really true in those years. But here comes along 2009, and we begin to see that trend downward, which is a great thing. Now, I'd like to think that's due to the Fallen Firefighters Foundation's initiatives on 16 life safety initiatives and other good practices that departments generally began to accept. And that looks like a good trend. But as you can see, all of a sudden, in 2013, it spikes back up again. Anybody have a reason for that? Yeah. Remember what they were? Yeah. Okay. But you're absolutely right. There's 2 incidents, the Yarn Hill fire in Arizona killed 19, and the fertilizer explosion plant in West Texas killed 9. So there's 28 right there. So let's discount that for a second, and I suppose that brings it down more in line with what the trend has begun. Obviously not that we're happy with that, but perhaps trending down a smidge. Interesting enough, another statistic that kind of relates to this is that of the firefighting fatalities that occurred in 2013, it was 28 different actual individual fires that occurred on. And ironically or otherwise, over the past 10 years, it's been almost identically that same number. So about the same quantity of fires that involve fatalities. Now this is, again, looking now just at 2013 fatalities entirety, and what was the general type of duty that was in use at the time. And I want to spend a little bit of time and go through each one of these pie slices so you can understand the actual details of those deaths. I'll start off by saying the operating at the fire ground, that largest pie you see there, 58%, that's the largest proportion of that pie since 1999. So, but again, attributed to the 2 individual incidents that sparked that increase. So let's move on to response to and returning from alarm. And interesting enough, your thought might be like mine, that first piece of the pie would be mostly all crashes. But ironically, it's not. Now, there were eight were. There were 8 crashes and rollovers, 5 were cardiac events, 1 stroke, 1 struck by a vehicle at an accident scene, 1 slipped and fell while backing into a station, and 1 was killed and knocked to the ground during some sort of altercation. Not a lot of detail was given on that one. Moving on to the training, the green one there, 7%. Let's look at what that was. 5 were killed due to cardiac issues, 1 during a work capacity test, 1 during fitness training, another during the recruit training, one in the training conference, one that wasn't specified, one during a training jump, the parachute didn't open, and one during a crash while returning from training. The next area, the non-fire emergencies, are red 7%. That encompassed 6 different motor vehicle crashes. 1 occurred at a medical emergency. 4 sudden cardiac deaths. 3 were struck by vehicles. And the other, the 10% up there, that included 9 sudden cardiac deaths. Mostly this was all during administrative duties. And then 1 suicide. So that kind of gives us, in those 2 slides, kind of the big picture as to where fatalities are trending in general, and what in general is the type of duty that's occurring. So let's dig a little deeper here. As they say, peel another layer off that onion. And now we're going to look just at fire training fatalities. And here you see it from 2003 to 2013, another 10 years. And you can see in 03, from 03 probably to 10, kind of waffling mostly in double digits. And then from 11 on, we got solidly down into the single digits. At first glance, looks like an improvement. Would you agree? I think so too. Interesting enough, or maybe perhaps sad, would note that 25% of the individuals killed during this time had 1 year or less of service at the time, and 25% were also occurred during recruit training. No, it's not good. Now, this next slide, I think, tells a little different picture. And I just find this very interesting because this slide shows the proportion of training deaths annually. In other words, it shows the percentage of the total number of deaths. So let's go back. You can see this chart goes from 1978 to 2009. So if we look at that top blue line that says all training deaths, we start off in 1978 with 4% of the total number of deaths occurred in training. With me? And then, let's say from 2000, you can see it's waffling, say, between 9% and 12%. As I say, this tells a different tale, in that although our numbers may be down, the proportion of deaths as it relates to the total number of deaths is on the rise. And let's look at these other 2 lines, because I think they're equally interesting. Looking at the blue line, the trauma, those are the proportion of deaths that have been attributed to trauma. The orange dotted line are those that have been attributed to medical causes. And as you can see, those that are attributed to medical causes is greater than those that were killed by trauma. And worse than that, I suppose, is if you look on those 2, the orange and the blue lines, the medical causes and trauma, over along, say, 2005 or 6 or something like that, you see where trauma, or let me back up, I guess it's more along 2003, trauma is going down, the same time medical is going up. Just to reflect here for a moment, let's go back to here, where we really have to dissect, I guess, these statistics, because this kind of paints one picture to think that, hey, we're doing pretty good here, and but by the same token, our total number of deaths are down too. So we have to kind of take all that into consideration. As I said, this to me gives a more telling picture of where we're at and what really are the issues relating to those deaths. Now what I want to do now, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide. This slide represents the type of activities that occurred during fatalities related to training between 2001 and 2010. Now, and in total, 108 deaths occurred. Now I suspect, don't know, but I suspect NFPA will probably come out with another report in 05 to 15. They about do this, I think, about every 5 years. So, but this is the most recent data we have to look at. So what I want to do is, again, go through each one of these categories and tell you how these deaths occurred, with the thought being that as you hear this, I hope light bulbs will be going off to say, well, okay, I can see how a risk reduction strategy would address this, or a risk reduction strategy would address that death. And in your own mind, you can think, well, do I have that in my department? Do I not have that in my department? So let's start with that first one, the 36% equipment apparatus drill. 36% was involved, a total of 39 deaths. 25 were due to overexertion, 22 sudden cardiac deaths, 1 aneurysm, 1 stroke, 1 dehydration. There are a number of falls, again in the same category, equipment and apparatus drills. 2 individuals died falling 85 feet. They were practicing getting off of a tower platform. 1 fell 65 feet from a fully extended 105-foot ladder set on a 65-degree angle. 1 fell from roof level while attempting to descend from the roof level. And 1 died rappelling from a helicopter. Still on drills now, 3 were struck by objects, 2 from a tree falling training, trees fell on them. This one is a bit bizarre. 1 was struck in the head by an air jack while conducting training on how to put chains on a pumper, snow chains. 2 died during crashes, 1 in the air, 1 on the ground. Sadly, the one on the ground had no seatbelt. 2 were struck by vehicles. Both of these are strange as well. 1 was by a pumper being backed up by a person with a suspended license. Some strategies coming in your head here. Another by a driver under the influence of prescription meds and alcohol. Another one, standing on top of a rescue unit, was crushed when the vehicle was pulled out of the station. The driver didn't realize they were there. And it keeps on getting bizarre. This one died when the individual hit their elbow inside of a compartment. Died 3 months later of a flesh-eating disease. Our next category, physical fitness. 30 deaths in that category. They're kind of broken down into 3 subcategories. 24 was sudden cardiac death, 3 heat stroke or hypothermia, and 3 strokes. And I want to look at each one of these individually. So let's start off with the 24 sudden cardiac deaths. 6 were during a work capacity test, the PAC test. 2 were undergoing an annual agility testing. And the sad thing was one of these 2 individuals had previously failed their evaluation and during the process was put on light duty and underlying medical issues were identified, had catheterization done, was released by the doctor back to full duty, but to get back to full duty, he had to pass his agility test again. He died during his evaluation. 17 remaining individuals died of cardiac sudden death. They were working out, running, working out, lifting weights, that sort of thing. Interesting here, I think, is in the NIOSH reports of those, NIOSH indicated that those individuals would not have been candidates for the sort of screening that could have detected their problems. To me, that tells me that maybe we need to relook at what screening is going on. I know that there's a 2013 edition now out of 1582 versus the earlier one. I haven't looked at it closely enough to see if there's new screenings there or not. But clearly that's maybe something that needs to be looked at for 17 individuals. Also in the same category, the physical fitness category, some information was given with regard to the requirement for physical exams. 11 of the 24 victims belonged to departments that had annual exams, so about half. But the weird part is there was one that required exams only if you were on the city's health plan. So if you weren't covered by the city's health plan, you weren't required to have an annual exam. Some were grandfathered. In this one situation, those that were hired before 1991 were not required. Those who were hired after 1991 were required. So the older folks were not required through the grandfathering process. 3 deaths occurred during heat strokes. And this was all jogging. NIOSH issues that were identified: no conditioning, nobody was climatized, no rest or water for over an hour, an untrained instructor. And the sad thing they included was, had just the CPAT preparation guidelines been used, it would not have occurred. Moving on to live fire, 13 lives lost there, again over this 10-year study. 4 of 13 died in burns or smoke inhalation. 2 were caught in a flashover during search and rescue of an acquired structure. 1 18-year-old died while playing the victim of a second story of an acquired structure. And 1 probationary firefighter was trapped in an acquired structure. 2 died from heat stroke. 1 collapsed after successive evolutions. They weren't sent to rehab or given the opportunity to cool down, just evolution after evolution. 1 recruit died in the 6th week of recruit school. It was shipboard firefighting, and there were numerous NFPA 1403 issues with that. 4 sudden cardiac death, 1 prior heart attack, 1 was an observer, 1 was setting up command because he was going to be evaluated for his incident command knowledge. 1 was exposed to smoke when the wind suddenly changed. 2 aneurysms, 1 struck and killed by a vehicle. Again, all during live fire training. And moving on to underwater dive operations. 1 was trapped under ice. 1 was trapped underwater by ropes. 1 became fatigued while operating in rough water. 2 failed to surface. They couldn't determine what the reason for that they went down. In Route 2 in training, 13 deaths, 8 during vehicle crashes. 2 fell from the tailgates of a pickup. 2 different incidents. 1 was struck by a vehicle when they stopped their vehicle to get out to retrieve something. 1 was a sudden cardiac death. The last was a stroke. Class seminar, 6 sudden deaths. 1 was shot during a meal break during training. 1 accidental overdose due to prescription drugs. So some risk reduction strategies going off in your mind, I'm sure, right?
The guy that was used as a live victim, that fire instructor and the fire chief that were running that evolution went to jail over that.
As well they should. As well they should. This next slide is based on that same data, which just helps us look at it in a little different perspective. Because here we're looking at the cause of death. And as you can see, and it's probably no surprise to you, the largest piece of the pie is sudden cardiac death. And I mean, that's what we see historically year to year as a leading cause of death in training incidents or otherwise. 23% internal trauma and crushing, that's mostly due to the vehicle collisions and the falls. And the remaining categories: drowning, strokes, heat stroke, smoke inhalation, and others. And the others was one overdose, 1 dehydration, 1 gunshot, and 1 septic shock.
Well, I didn't say never. I didn't say never. I didn't say never. I just said, I like to think all the time.
Work towards that.
And work from ahead. And look at data like this on a constant basis.
Right.
And try to do things differently. Change the way we train.
Ultimately change the culture.
Right. It's a cultural change. That's true.
Just looking at it from the perspective of age, in the deaths that occurred in this time period range from age 17 to 74. And you can see how the breakdown or percentage almost occurred as it relates to sudden cardiac death in the age. So get above 45, 50, you can see 11 out of the 14 were due to sudden cardiac death, which again is no great surprise because as we get older, that risk is going to increase. Kind of shows the same thing, but in a slight different perspective. Again, same data, but it puts on the chart an average age. You see the average age of the firefighters who died was on about 40. So if your age is below 40, you have a less than average chance of dying. And if your age is above 40, you have a greater than average chance of dying. And you can see by the time you get over there, age 60 and above, you're almost twice as likely to die in a training-related incident. I guess one good news of this chart, you see that the teenage category there, 16 to 19, the last time this was done, 1996, that category skyrocketed over the average. Now we're down below average. Now, what's that attributed to? Best practices, less teenagers, I don't know. But we're down below average by a good bit in that age category. And the last statistical slide here is now injuries. Not deaths, but injuries in just 2003 that are related to training. So if you look in that bottom right-hand column, the second row where it says total, you see the total number of injuries occurred in 2013 related to training, 7,140. And then I'll let you scan that yourselves to see the quantity and percentage of the others. It's probably no surprise as you scan it that you see strains and sprains kind of topping the list as far as the cause of the injuries with 4,355 or 61%. Don't have a lot of information on the other. I mean, I see that's 580, 8%. It's like dislocation and thermal stress are probably the next in line as far as percentages and quantities. But again, without a doubt, strains and sprains are a number one resultant when we have a training injury. I find this slide interesting too, much like the earlier one which showed the trend in firefighter deaths. And the NFPA reports over the past 25 years, post-mortem information on deceased firefighters have been available for 713 of the 1,177 that have died from sudden cardiac death. Of those, 603, or 84%, had suffered prior heart attacks or had priorly known other issues. So essentially, we knew we had a risk in place. To what degree it was addressed, of course, we don't know. But clearly, the risk was increased. And have you been to the Firehouse Expo or other national conventions where the Heart Healthy program was there in a booth? Well, if you have, you've seen that they take blood pressures, cholesterol, and offer to take body fat to get a sense for your own health. But they also collect that information and gather it. And here we see some of those collections. This is a result of screenings of over 5,000. Down below in the results you see 2,000 were tested for body fat. And 44.7% considered to be obese. It's almost half. 6.8 had stage 2 hypertension. 31 had stage 1. 46 are pre-hypertensive, only 15% with normal blood pressure. Nearly 40% borderline high in cholesterol. So a lot of known risk factors. These are just a few slides of some individual locations. Again, you see in this pre-hypertensive, FORAT RAID, anything else? Percent body fat for men, largest percentage were overweight. As you can see, hardly no one was lean or excessively lean. Women's stats a bit better, although I'm not sure that's something to be proud of, looking at those numbers. This number surprises me a little bit, but again, this was just for limited locations. But when they put together all of the statistics, came up with a heart health score, which would be a combination of blood pressure, cholesterol. As you can see, they categorized 961 as high risk. Only 94 were ideal risk. Obviously, with their assessment of folks that are at the trade shows, we're not a healthy bunch. And again, light bulbs should be going off. Stats still continue to show cardiac death by occupation, firefighting still tops the list. And as you can see, by a pretty good margin, more than twice the lowest, the next on the list. That's kind of our look at statistics with the hope of letting you see what's going on nationally, what's going on just within their training desks, in hopes of you being current, seeing how they're occurring, and letting some of those light bulbs go off as to what would be some good risk reduction strategies out there and how they relate within your department. What I'd like to do now is share some what at MIFRE we consider to be some safe fire training priorities. We have 3 of them: safety, educational purpose, and realistic. I'd like to go through each one of these individually. And by safety, we mean in compliance with good national standards, knowing the percentage of compliance you are with each one of these: 1403, 1500, 1582, 10041. Using qualified instructors, using good training facilities, an appropriate fire load, medical fitness. And as probably some of you know, I guess within the last 18 months to 2 years, we instituted a program of requiring medical clearance for our students, attending certain classes that required strenuous activities. We've always required it, or I shouldn't say always, but quite a while have required it of our instructors. So it's too early to tell what the impact of that has been, but I can't help but think it's going to be positive. Now, is it a 1582 physical? Well, of course not. But at least it's an assessment to begin to weed out those who might be more prone to medical issues than those who wouldn't be. Obviously, a good safety plan and procedure, environmental monitoring. And by educational purpose, meaning training has to have a purpose. It needs to be a lesson plan. Within the lesson plan, clear objectives as to what we're trying to accomplish, realizing, of course, that we're not trying to make it a test of endurance, as you saw in the very first slide with the Hell Knight, not a contest, but realistic. We need to prepare students for fire responses, but by the same token, exposing them only to situations that are appropriate for the level of education and experience. And of course, realism within the confines of safety. So that's our little tour of stats and our take on some of the best practices. Our next little segment will be for me to share with you a near miss example that we had. And again, it's something that we're not especially proud that happened, but I think it was important that the action we took was done, and more importantly, share with others and hope that you can learn from it as we have. So, quick overview of it. It happened a couple of years ago in the spring of 2012. The instructor was struck and seriously injured by a vehicle driven by a student. It was during our emergency vehicle operators class, EVO class. The evolution was called left-right lateral evasive maneuver. And if you don't know what that is, I'll show you in just a moment. But the immediate action that day was that evolution was suspended pending the outcome of the analysis. Analysis was done by our risk management committee that I chair. It consists of about 6 people. But in addition to that group, we pulled in the lead instructor for the class to be a part of the committee for a couple reasons. One, that, well, who would have better insight as to what occurred than him? But also, we just wanted him to be part of the process. We didn't want him to be on the outside looking in on that. He needed to be part of it. And our overall strategy to do it would be, I'm sure, much like yours, in that we really wanted to be fact-finding, not fault-finding. It wasn't an intention to draw fault to anyone. But overall, we had 3 goals. That simply was to find out what happened, why did it happen, and what can we do to either make it not happen again or at least reduce the risk of it happening again. This is where it occurred, very close to our Southern Maryland Regional Training Center, located in La Plata. See, it was basically across the street at the Charles County Board of Education. This is a sequence of events. In the upper right-hand corner, you see immediately before the incident, the training vehicle was to your left and was headed in the direction of the 2 lanes of travel. The instructor was located right between those 2 lanes of travel. His intention was to tell the training vehicle what lane to go into, and he had flags in his hands, go in this lane or that lane. And sometimes they would direct him to go left, sometimes they would direct him to go right. The idea was that they wouldn't have prior knowledge as to what lane to go into. So you can probably see what happened here. So here we are immediately after the incident, where the training vehicle is now passed by where the instructor had been standing. The vehicle struck him, threw him 65 feet to approximately where you see him located there. I got there probably about an hour after it happened, but those who were there immediately and were able to immediately apply aid to him really thought we'd lost him right there. And my goodness, it was a close call, but he did survive and is actually back to work. But it was an extremely close call. This photo gives you perhaps a better perspective. This would be in the eyes of the training vehicle's driver, headed down. In fact, you can see the vehicle that was involved down there further. It was a suburban type of vehicle. Thank goodness it wasn't something larger than that. You can see the 2 lanes of travel. A little closer view where the instructor was standing after he was struck, where he lie after being struck by the vehicle. You see the flag laying on the asphalt. So what did we do? How did the analysis flow? Obviously the first thing we did was look at NFP 8002 to really get a better sense as to what that required, what job performance requirement required that evolution to exist in the first place. Reviewed student instructor materials to see what guidance was given to them as far as how to operate this evolution. Other resources. Discussed procedures utilized in other regions. And as we did that, it was not consistent, as you might guess, as to where the instructor positioned himself. Obviously, in this case, the instructor chose to position himself between the 2 lanes. Other regions indicated they had their instructors stand off to the side and either hold up a 1 or a 2 or something like that to indicate which lane to go into. We got a lot of instructor input, again, to just understand how they conduct that evolution, and what the value of that evolution was and that sort of thing. And then when it was all said and done, we completed what we thought was a good comprehensive risk-benefit analysis. In other words, what was the value of that evolution versus what were the risks that were entailed. And finally, decision was made that that evolution was going to be eliminated, which, as you know, when dealing with risk management, if you can eliminate the risk, that's the best way to go. Now, could it be argued that maybe we could have put other risk reduction strategies in to reduce the risk? We probably could have. But we decided the best decision was just simply to eliminate the evolution. And there was no impact with regard to certification as well. One of the silver linings of the process was the risk management committee who conducted the analysis realize, well, if there are issues in that evolution, might there be issues in other evolutions? So, took upon a venture to review every single evolution that the Institute has, 162 of them. We took 2 a week, and 2 years later, completed the review of all of the evolutions. And I can tell you that in itself was a good experience too. Because while there were no issues as predominant and of concern that we identified there were a lot of little issues that were identified. It was a great exercise. It might have been simple things like maybe PPE wasn't identified as to what's required for a particular evolution, maybe well-defined duties of the safety officer for that particular evolution wasn't identified, but we identified a lot of good things during that process. So a bit of a silver lining. But the bottom line of it is extremely close call, extremely close call. That could have been extremely bad and could probably easily have been a death we've been talking about as it was an injury. But as most close calls are, it is truly an opportunity to learn from the past and improve upon the future. And again, if you didn't get a lot out of that based upon your particular responsibilities, at least learn the value of sharing close calls. I know you've had a separate session on this, but I know I personally set a reminder in my Outlook every month to check the training close calls through the National Near Miss program. What I'd like to do now, in the remaining time that we have about 10 minutes, is I would like to hear from you guys, if we can hear each other over this ring. In that, what are some of the strategies that you're using within your departments to help reduce the risk of training-related injuries? And if you're not familiar with those, what strategies in general are you using within your department? And I found it very valuable in each one of these that we're doing, that different departments are doing different things, and there's been a lot of business cards that have been exchanged as a result of that. It's been pretty valuable. So can we start in the back here and just kind of work our way around?
Just looking at some of the training evolutions that are out there from a safety perspective, like you did the internal safety audit or risk audits of your training programs. I think it's key for every department that's conducting training, be it station level, be it at a training academy, that they must, be it annually or biannually, look at their training evolutions and figure out what works well and what improvements you have to make to them. Because of your instructor being struck by a vehicle in your EVOC programs, making sure that your instructors are wearing traffic safety vests, that they're in a area that with vehicles moving around, they need to be in an area that they're not susceptible to being struck by a vehicle, be it, pulling them off the courses or putting them in the vehicles with the drivers. So you definitely, good things that you got to work on, and what you brought out were making sure that you're always auditing those programs to make sure that you're doing the best safe practices out there. It's definitely key to a successful program.
I think each department has an opportunity to learn from other ones, whether you have close call reports, near miss reports, or risk reduction reports. The staff does a lot of work, and their guests from other jurisdictions to put this report together. I think it's each of our duties to relay it at the kitchen table and at the academy oars to read them and not just leave another document sitting out there. Our department shares our close call reports with the near miss program, so everyone can learn from our mishaps.
I think a lot of it is like having, before you start a training evolution, is having everybody together on the same page, having the pre-training discussion, what your plan is, who's doing what, and then after training go through and sit down and talk about what everybody did and what they can do to improve for the next time.
Not always the best option, but a lot of it's going just to online type training too, which obviously avoiding a lot of the hands-on potential injury factor gives you an opportunity to experience some things you really can't simulate or can't do in real life.
Right.
I'd say situational awareness. If you're going to try something new, something different, kind of back where the other gentleman says, bounce it off of somebody else. Bounce it off, hey, what do you think about doing it this way? So that way you can maybe troubleshoot some things and put stop measures, risk reduction in place.
I think a lot of the risk reduction stuff, if you will, with regards to training, MIFRE has done has done their part in employing that and putting it in the instructor manual. So even if you're doing a company drill, somewhere along the line there's an instruction manual that talks about doing that skill or whatever that program that skill came from. And that stuff's accessible online. go online, bring it up, and look at it, because there's teaching points in every one of those that get added to the instructor guide for that. The drill of the month stuff. It's you have to do a safety review over it all the time, and a lot of times when people will call me and say, we're going to do this training, we want to do that, what do you think about it? I use that as a resource to go back and say, well, make sure you consider this and that, and then guys will ask me, where'd you come up with that? And I'm not that smart enough, I didn't make it up, I just went back and went through the instructor manual and pulled it out of there. So that's another resource that's out there that I use quite a bit to make sure that guys follow it, because most of it is from things that happened in the past.
Howard County, I applaud you guys. You have a brand new Bureau of Occupational Health and Safety. I mean, talk about a strategy. I mean, that's awesome. And, I mean, it's a major milestone in your department to move forward.
The only thing I think we really start to need to look at now is that with our structural firefighting model, that we're probably going to have to understand the airflow, the air path, and the way that we're teaching students to advance into the fire environment. Rather than them have to go into the environment, they should be able to monitor the environment and look at different scientific methodologies that shows us we don't have to be in the room that's on fire. And I think we're moving towards that with the new 1403 class.
Thank you for your participation in that last exercise. I appreciate it. So just as a quick review here, we started off looking at fire training fatalities and injuries, trying to give you that big picture, narrowing it down to just training, narrowing it down to what we do, with the goal of hopefully having some light bulbs go off if you didn't already have light bulbs going off in your department about things to implement. I hope you learned something from our near miss. Again, if not, the value of sharing near misses, and obviously appreciate the information sharing you did in the last segment.